Let's go live to Greg Sheridan now. Joins us today, as he does every week, foreign editor at The Australian. Greg, there's been a lot made of the very sloppy start and wet start for Rishi Sunak, and then the football problem he had there campaigning. But more broadly, you look at Keir Starmer, and he really has shed the Jeremy Corbyn past of Labor and has moved that party back to the middle. That looks to me the most potent issue that Rishi Sunak faces in this election.
Well, yeah, Kieran, I think you're right. So I spent quite a bit of time with Rishi Sunak on a visit to London last year. I had the good fortune to have a series of meetings with him over a couple of days. He's an immensely impressive guy. I'd say of all the prime ministers I've met, he's more across the detail and knows what he's doing. But he's just in a hopeless position, a completely hopeless position. Keir Starmer is dull and bureaucratic and plodding, but that may be just what the times need. So Sunak himself was a great contrast to the ill discipline of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. Keir Starmer presents himself as a contrast to the ill discipline of the Conservatives. You're absolutely right. Starmer has moved the Labor Party back to the centre, and that's essential to their appeal. However, his party hasn't moved with him. He's moved the parliamentary party to some extent, but, you know, the party twice elected Jeremy Corbyn as leader and has just had a whole lot of people defect from the party to elect local councillors as the voice of Gaza. So the way the polls are at the moment, Starmer will win big, but he's going to have a lot of trouble in government because he doesn't have the money to implement a left-wing program. And his party, I think, is going to still be a long way to the left of the electorate.
And given the results last time, he needs to win big just to get the majority in the House of Commons.
Yeah, so he's got a lot of things going in his favour. Boris Johnson, the most extraordinary political talent we've seen, really, in British politics since Margaret Thatcher, won, you know, basically 100 seats that the Conservatives have never held before. And the Conservatives are going to lose them all this time. So that gives Starmer a big base. Then secondly, you've had the implosion of the Scottish Nationalist Party with, you know, its former leaders being charged with corruption and another leader having to resign. Now, that means that Labor has a good chance of sweeping up a whole swag of Scottish seats, which always used to be central to a Labor majority in Britain. And then you've got Labor doing very well in Wales. So at the moment, Starmer has the same lead that Tony Blair had at this stage of the first Blair landslide. Now, prime ministers have come back from perilous situations in the past. You think of John Major or our own Scott Morrison, but they've normally had an opposition leader who has some doubt about them, and they've also been running a government which hasn't been completely discredited, whereas the Tories look so discredited at the moment. One reason I think Rishi Sunak may have gone early is that Nigel Farage's party is not yet kind of fully organised, and he probably wants to make sure that the Conservatives save enough of the furniture that they remain the main centre-right party. You know, he wants to have 150 Conservative MPs at least, or 200 maybe, and then they're the party which can challenge Labor in the future. Whereas if it had gone for another 5 months or something, you know, he may have been coming third to the Reform Party in a lot of electorates.
And Greg, to the Middle East now, where the Israeli strike on Rafah has been criticised by a number of world leaders. The French President Macron labelled the strike outrageous. Penny Wong released a statement following the strike and says the events of the last 24 hours underscore that we must see a humanitarian ceasefire so that civilians can be protected. Israel's strikes have had horrific and unacceptable consequences. What do you make of the strike and the reaction?
Well, Kieran, it seems to be a terrible tragedy. So I don't have any inside information on it, but we know that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has issued a statement saying that this strike was a tragic mistake. And he has not been prone to accepting that, Israeli Defence Force strikes have been in error up till now. I mean, it's a tragedy for the people who were killed. That's the most important thing. But it's also a tragedy for Israel because at this moment, when they are being blackguarded all around the world, I think very often unfairly, for them to, choose this moment to make what seems to have been a grievous operational error. The tragedy of war is that this sometimes happens. The Israelis themselves have said they're going to investigate it. There's an emergency United Nations Security Council meeting about it. I agree that a ceasefire, I agree with Penny Wong that we need a ceasefire, absolutely. And of course, the people who are preventing a ceasefire are Hamas. If they agreed to release even 30 Israeli hostages, they could have a ceasefire tomorrow. But I do think the politics have moved so badly against Israel. There's a kind of a time limit to this sort of thing. It just can't go on and on and on. And I think Israel needs to come to a stage where major combat operations come to an end, and even if that's not with a formal ceasefire, and even if Israel has to resume targeted strikes down the track. I mean, I think if these Hamas leaders ever stick their heads out of the tunnels, Israel will kill them. And it might be better to stop big operations for a while. It's a very messy and indeed very tragic situation.
Greg Sheridan, thank you as always. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Kieran.